My name is Tricia Ngoon, and I'll be presenting our paper today about ClassInSight, designing conversation support tools to visualize classroom discussion for personalized teacher professional development. Getting students to talk and engage in discourse in the classroom is important. Classroom discourse can give students a voice to their learning and improve mastery of curriculum, reasoning, and educationally relevant attitudes. In order to create productive classroom discussions, teachers develop a professional vision, which consists of three components. The first is noticing, paying attention to important events in classroom discussion, interpreting, making meaning and sense of discussion events that are noticed, and responding, using the interpretations of discussion events to guide future actions in the classroom. To develop professional vision, continuous formative feedback can help teachers to develop this vision in the context of their own classes, especially in classes where there's a lot of discussion and a lot of other things going on. Class observations by administration, professional development professionals, or instructional coaches can give such personalized feedback, but these don't scale due to the labor and time intensiveness of these methods. So teachers engage in professional development, or PD as we'll refer to it, which is essentially continuous learning. But in order to scale PD, it is often one-to-many, meaning it's not often personalized nor adaptable to the changing needs and workloads of teachers. Recently, the learning science and HCI community have looked into technology for recording classroom events and providing automated personalized feedback for teachers on their discussion practices. In the research space, some examples are Classroom Discourse Analyzer, which shows classroom discourse snippets from videos of class events, and the Talk Moves application, which categorizes talk according to the Accountable Talk Moves framework. Within industry, there's TeachFX, which similarly captures student and teacher talk and questioning practices. We build on much of this work for ClassInSight, a tool for visualizing classroom discussion for teacher reflection. And I'll talk about the research and design process as well as give an overview of the app. ClassInSight is part of a design-based research project, which in education research involves an iterative process of developing tools based on research, testing these tools, evaluating them, and then reflecting on these findings to start the cycle again. DBR, design-based research, often deals with questions of practice rather than questions of theory. And this version of ClassInSight that I will present is the latest cycle in this DBR process. Our research team consists of learning science, HCI, computational, and design researchers from Carnegie Mellon University, University of California, San Diego, and Pennsylvania State University. We collaborate with teachers in the Vista School District in San Diego, California. Specifically, we worked with 22 middle school science teachers. And of those teachers, we had a cohort of 5 teachers that participated in co-design, prototyping, and interview activities throughout the span of this project, which lasted from the 2019 to 2022 academic years. Our data collection procedure consisted of collecting audio data from classrooms. This data is then transcribed by a third-party service and hand-coded by the research team according to the SATA coding scheme developed by Hennessy et al., the details of which can be found in the paper. The data is then uploaded and visualized in ClassInSight. And once teachers' data is in ClassInSight, they schedule a reflection session with the researcher to discuss their data in a collaborative reflection session. As previously mentioned, this is the latest cycle of DBR. And this work actually builds on a previous design of ClassInSight, which you can see here, which formed the foundation of the 3 data visualizations in our current version of ClassInSight. The visualizations offer 3 granularities of data. The first is the talk ratio, which is coarse-grained and gives a high-level overview of teacher versus student talk and percentages of talk for each talk category. The turn-taking is medium-grained, and it visualizes the cadence of discussion within a tree-like visualization. And lastly, the transcript is fine-grained, giving full detail of the discussion and exactly what was said. I'll go through the app now. So the first thing the teacher sees is the talk ratio visualization, and clicking on a category of talk shows excerpts within that category, which then clicking on the excerpt goes to the location of dialogue within the transcript. And on the left, a mini view of turn-taking shows where dialogue is in context of the whole discussion. And on the right is a structured schema to guide teachers' reflections. And with ClassInSight, we sought to answer 2 research questions. The first being, how do teachers use features of ClassInSight in their reflections over time? And what are the factors and barriers of adoption of discourse visualization tools like ClassInSight? To answer these questions, we looked at longitudinal data across 22 reflection session transcripts and 4 post-interviews over 3 academic years with 5 middle school science teacher participants. And again, these 5 teachers were part of our cohort that participated in various design activities throughout our project, and all teachers had over 10 years of teaching experience. For the presentation of findings, they will be referred to by pseudonyms. To analyze this data, we conducted an inductive thematic analysis in which we allowed themes to emerge from our data to uncover high-level insights from across our data sources. We saw a theme of quantification, which mainly stemmed from teachers viewing the talk ratio visualization. The talk ratio, which shows this coarse-grained overview of teacher versus student talk, gave teachers a point from which they could evaluate their own data against their expectations and ask questions about it. For instance, Bonnie here says that the talk ratio helped her start thinking about whether the data accurately reflected what she expected and ask questions about whether it was where she wanted it to be. All teachers actually mentioned a feeling of dissonance or surprise at their talk ratio visualization because it differed from their own perceptions or expectations. So for example, Jeff said he was surprised that his teacher talk was so high compared to what he expected. And this led to him asking questions and seeking answers from his discussion data. However, dissonance that isn't resolved can lead to some negative responses towards data. So this teacher, Sheila, said she felt inadequate from her talk ratio. And unfortunately, as she only had 2 reflection sessions, we weren't really able to see how this dissonance was resolved and her further questioning of her data. After seeing their data quantified, teachers wanted to answer questions about their data and contextualize it within the turn-taking visualization. So for example, Tom used the turn-taking visualization to see where there are chunks of shorter or longer teacher dialogue to better understand the conversational dynamics in his class. And for the transcript visualization, this helped them gain full context of the class, examining the nuances of the discussion and resolving dissonance from the talk ratio. As Kate says, the transcript was really useful for her because it helped her understand how she was teaching her lesson, which may have differed from how she remembered it. Teachers mentioned that the turn-taking and transcript visualizations together helped in gaining a full picture of the discussion to contextualize both the sequence and the nuance of the discussion. As Tom states, he would look back and forth between the two to try to understand his lesson, and it made it easy for him to recall and make sense of what was happening in his lesson. However, not all teachers wanted this much context. Jeff didn't find that he needed all of the data, stating that what students are saying isn't as important as how much. And he mainly relied on the talk ratio to examine towards his discussion goals. And a really interesting finding we found was related to teachers' professional vision and how it shifted over time. Teachers started with little expectation or knowledge of what to see in their data, or what to interpret in their data. So for example, in an early reflection session, her second session, Bonnie stated that she didn't know what she was going to see in her data. She didn't have any expectations. And in her last and 5th reflection session, she noted that she was waiting to see specific teaching practices reflected in her data. In another instance, we saw comparisons between previous discussion data and more current data. So as Jeff notes in his second reflection session, he makes a general statement about wanting students to make connections. And in his last and 6th reflection session, he's able to compare what he's seeing to previous data and notice the changes occurring in his class. And these shifts came over time as teachers became familiar with their data, the ClassInSight tool, and how to notice teaching practices within their data. We also asked teachers about factors that would contribute to using and adopting these types of conversation support tools. The personalization and accountability aspects were main factors when teachers compared using ClassInSight to their current PD practices. As Kate notes, that this is the only form of data and reflection that was specific to her own classroom behaviors and contexts compared to more general PD. And Sheila also states that follow-up and persistence in doing multiple recordings and reflections has a greater sense of accountability than the typical one-and-done PD. There were also some challenges and barriers in using ClassInSight. One was in the learning curve both of the app and, more importantly, how talk codes were categorized and differentiated. Tom says that he wasn't sure how the invite code was being determined and how it might differ from other talk codes. Another barrier was the granularity of data available. ClassInSight gave 3 different granularities that teachers could reflect on, but ultimately, Jeff felt that the talk ratio was the most useful, as the others may have been too overwhelming or too time-consuming for a teacher to sift through. And these themes lead to questions about what's relevant to teachers in their discussion, and aligning this with what we as researchers and designers find to be relevant for improving talk in the classroom, especially with the use of AI in categorizing classroom talk. So we find 3 implications for highlighting and displaying this relevance in data. The first is in interpretability. The data should be understandable for teachers, both in terms of how the data is curated and what the data means. And this is an ongoing challenge in these research practice partnerships and trying to align user and researcher understandings of talk categories. And one of the lessons we learned was to provide more consistent and continuous guidance, specifically in designing the talk codes and definitions with teachers rather than just for teachers. The next is in the response and how teachers respond to data. As we saw, dissonance can sometimes be productive. Some teachers resolve their dissonance through further questioning and examination of their data. But as we saw for one teacher, it can also lead to a negative emotional response that takes time to resolve. And this is a challenge for any data-driven tool, as even if data is agnostic, it can lead to some form of self-evaluation, both positive and negative. We can look to personal informatics or other goal-setting tools to learn how we can frame data in a more motivational context. And lastly, there's issues of trust. So in our case, our talk codes were hand-coded by our research team, and teachers could discuss disagreements or inaccuracies with the research team during their reflection sessions. But if we use AI to categorize talk at scale, when teachers might be using these types of tools on their own, this can exacerbate trust of these systems if there are misunderstandings or perceived inaccuracies in how data is surfaced and categorized, which could lead to abandonment of these tools. And our own future work is looking at strategies such as explanations or confidence scores to try to address some of these issues. Now, these findings are not applicable only to teaching and classroom discussions. There are many other professions in which conversation and interactions between people are important, such as in healthcare, therapy, coaching, and more. And several research systems examine both audio, video, and other types of multimodal conversation support for these different domains, such as CORME for psychotherapy, EQ Clinic for medical students trying to improve their nonverbal behaviors, and Inward for improving coaching interactions. We hope that our findings can provide some themes and design guidelines for these support tools across domains and professions. In conclusion, through a longitudinal deployment of ClassInSight across 3 academic years, 22 reflection sessions with 5 teachers, we found themes related to their use of ClassInSight data visualizations for quantification and contextualization of their discussions. Over time, we also observed how teachers shifted in their professional vision and expectations of discussion data. And finally, teachers also noted factors and barriers in using conversation support tools like ClassInSight. And these themes could apply to the design of conversation support tools for teaching and other professions where human-to-human interactions are critical for professional success. I'd like to thank you for listening to this talk. Thank you to my collaborators and teacher participants for valuable contributions to this work. Thank you to the James S. McDonnell Foundation and National Science Foundation for funding this work. And I'm actually now a research scientist at TeachFX, continuing this line of research, so I'm happy to answer any questions or have discussions around potential collaborations. Thank you.